PMP exam preparation workshop. 5 means 5 process groups, 10 means 10 knowledge area, and 49 is the processes what we have. Okay, so it goes like this. If you refer to our sheet here, I started up by writing 5 process groups, starting with initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and control, and closing. So we agreed these are our 5 process group. And can anybody help me with the 10 knowledge areas?
Integration management.
Integration management. So let me start typing in here so that we can easily remember that. So I'll write down project integration management.
Scope management.
And I'm sure with the explanation what I have shared with you before, you are very well aware of what these knowledge areas are all about. Or it would be a good idea to maybe use a little shortcut here. And the shortcut is, if I may start writing down the word called project and management, and then we can easily add up the 3rd line item, which is going to be coming up in between. That would be a little shortcut to carry out the job. Okay, so after scope, you said
schedule.
Schedule, and then comes up the costing.
Cost.
Okay. After
Quality.
cost, we have quality. Okay. After quality,
Resources.
After quality, we have resource.
Communication.
After resource, we have communication. Absolutely. Okay, and after communication,
And
we have risk management.
Risk.
After risk, we have procurement management. And after procurement, we have stakeholder. Okay, so these are going to be our 10 knowledge areas. So let me put a number for a reference. 1, 2, 3. So this will ensure that we don't miss on any of the knowledge area. The count is matching up. Perfect. So that's how I'm going to be starting up with. And let me highlight that with maybe another color. Okay. So out of 5, 10, and 49, we are through with the 10 and 5. Now the job starts to talk about on the 49 processes. So the first process what we have, this process is part of initiating and part of project integration management. And this process name is develop
Project management plan.
Project charter. No, you have to first prepare a charter plan. It's going to be in the planning. We are in the initiating now. Okay. Now, if you look at develop project charter, what you have to notice is develop project charter is the process which marks the beginning of the project. And when you say it marks the beginning of the project, this means that if a project is existing in an organization, we expect that the project charter is the first thing which would have in the place. So develop project charter marks the beginning of the project. And few other things to take a note of for develop project charter. Before you start preparing your charter, it is expected that you would have done a feasibility study. You would have worked out why this particular project is beneficial and why should we go for this particular project. So feasibility study, finding out what benefits this will provide, all that would have been discussed before we will start the project charter. Now, who signs the project charter? The person who's paying the money for the project. So we can actually, on a safer side, call this person as the project sponsor. So sponsor is the one who's supposed to be signing the project charter. And one very important message, that project charter contains the name of the project manager who is going to be delivering this project. So if you can notice this word saying the project manager's authority is given to him only after project charter document is signed. That means he gets a legitimate authority after this charter document is signed. And this also has an indirect meaning. The indirect meaning is, if the project manager name is not there in the project charter, then who is he to use the office resources and who is he to give instructions to the people? That means what I am communicating here is, project manager gets the authority to lead the project and use the office resources only after the project charter document is signed. And this is supposed to be the first document what we are going to be starting our project with. No charter present means no project present. So that's the first process what we have. So what am I going to be doing with you guys now is, I will actually go process by process, give you about a one-liner or a two-liner message of each of those processes. And then later, maybe in our other classes, I will do a very a deep dive in each of those processes. So simply speaking, I'm going to be giving you a high-level idea on all the 49 processes now, and then I will actually complete this 5, 10, and 49 chart. So you have to start remembering and understanding with me in the flow in which I'm actually going ahead. So my first process, which is a develop project charter, let me come down to the second process we have in initiating. And that second process is part of the knowledge area called project stakeholder management. And this is called as identify stakeholders. Now, who are these stakeholders? A stakeholder is a person or a group who's positively.
Yogesh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry, I wanted to ask. Are you taking these in order the project moves forward?
Yes,
I mean the reason why we jumped from point 1 to point 10.
Yeah, so let us not look at the knowledge area. Let us look at the initiating. When you start your project, so what is that you'll be doing that in the beginning? Now you should look at more from the initiating, planning, executing this category perspective. When you initiate, you start the projector, right, and then you should know who are the stakeholders. So I'm trying to follow this sequence, and I'll let you know wherever the sequence is going to be overlapping, I'll tell you the same. Okay. So second is identify stakeholder. Now I said who these stakeholders are. A stakeholder can be a person or a group which is positively or negatively getting impacted by my project or by my project outcomes or by my project processes. I'm calling that as a stakeholder. Example of stakeholders: customers, vendors, my team, maybe some other program managers, let us say finance team, let us say HR team. So these are some of those examples of the stakeholders. So once the project charter is signed, the second process generally we carry out, that's called as identify stakeholder. That means I find out who are going to be my stakeholder. And at a later stage, I will also look at how these guys can influence my project. And some of those stakeholders would also give me the project related requirements. Okay. So coming back.
Yogesh, I have one question here.
Yeah.
Yogesh, is there any relation again, identify stakeholder activity to project charter activity? is there any connection between them? Before, for example, identify stakeholders will again update back to the charter, or
No.
is there any connection
Project
between them?
charter, project charter is a one-time activity in the project. We don't modify the project charter. Now, project charter carries the business case. Project charter also contains a purchase order or an SOW or a document which customer gave it to you for starting up your project. So once I receive the charter, I will go through those documents and then I can easily understand who are the guys where I'm going to be delivering a project. So let's assume that today I got a purchase order. Let us say that I got a purchase order from one of my customer and he wants me to develop a software or an app. Now, I wanted to, looking at a purchase order, I can get to know which is this company which wants me to develop an app, who are going to be the users of this app, what this app is going to be serving the purpose. So considering charter, then I'm able to prepare my stakeholders. So in a simple word, the charter is going to be becoming an input for me to identify who the stakeholders are, whom am I going to be dealing. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to be, by the way, I think I need to mention that again. I'm going to be covering up each of those processes in a very, very detail with you guys. This is just a high level introduction, what I wanted to give it to you, not exceeding 2 or 3 lines. Okay. So all your questions will be, the good time for you to raise these questions on the processes is that when I will do deep dive in each of those 49 processes. As of now, let us understand the high level flow and the meaning of these processes. So that's the objective of going through this 5 and 49 now. Okay. Next, what I have is, when we start doing our planning, we will start with the planning about the scope, what scope we have for this. Now, what we need to understand here is, whenever there is a term going to be coming up with a word called plan and with a word called management, if you get a term like this, planned and management, this means I am going to be focusing on strategies, on discussions, and what discussions and what strategy. Strategies on, for example, how do I gather the requirements? How do I define the scope? How do I create a work breakdown structure? How do I verify my scope? How do I control my scope? That means the various processes what I have within the scope management knowledge area, how should I be doing those processes? So I would like to go ahead with a discussion with my team members in understanding how will I do each of those items, including requirements gathering, including scope creation, including work breakdown structure. So all that gets discussed. And when I complete that discussion, the document what I create after the completing the plan scope management, that document is going to be called as scope management plan. Now, scope management plan is the output of a process called plan scope management. Now, similarly, like plan scope management, I try to discuss on all the scope related processes. How do I do it? So if I actually move into any of the other knowledge area, let us say schedule management, and if I type in here as let us say plan schedule management, if I try typing in plan schedule management, and if I try to explain on what plan schedule management is, I will again be maybe giving you a similar indication saying plan schedule management, I try to discuss those strategies, those actions required for me to define activities, sequence activities, prioritize them in an order, estimate those activities, sequencing them, and then trying to arrive at the final schedule, which we are calling that as the schedule baseline, right? So each of the plan, scope management or schedule management, such kind of a processes, they are primarily focused on bringing up people together, deciding their strategies, and this strategy we are calling that as a plan. So for example, output of plan scope management, I will write down here and I'll say that's the scope management plan. Similarly, output of plan schedule management is going to be schedule management plan. Now this output, what I'm writing, this is one of the output of that plan. There is a possibility we might get some other outputs. Okay, so that's a rough idea. Now, what we would like to go ahead from here is, after plan scope management, the next thing which is important for us from the processes perspective is the second process we have after plan scope management. And the second process what we have, that's called as collect requirements. Now the purpose of the process called collect requirement, as the name suggests, gathering of those requirements. So what I'll do is, from the stakeholders whom I have identified as a part of the identify stakeholder process, I would like to gather the details pertaining to the project what I am in, referencing my project charter, referencing the purchase order or any documents customer has given it to me, and then we will start taking a note of all the requirements. Now these are the requirements which will be finally taking the shape of the scope at one stage. So as of now, in the beginning, if you look at, these are all the requirements what I'm going to be taking a note. And if I talk about of all those requirements, they will be becoming an input for me. And when I am going to be defining my scope of the project, I will take those requirements in the picture. So basically, the output from a collect requirements will become input in my defined scope, and that is where I will actually be talking about of a defined scope. So defined scope process deals with two things mainly. First is product scope, and the second is project scope. Now, what is the difference between project scope and product scope? A product scope is nothing but a characteristics of a product. For example, I wanted to buy a car, and the features what I'm looking into the car is ABS, autopilot system. I want a good boot space. I want a very good engine which can give me a mileage of at least about 35 kilometers in 1 liter. I would also be looking forward for an option in case you can provide me maybe a dual fuel stuff. Maybe one is that you allow me a petrol, and the other is I may be even looking forward for maybe a gas-based engine. So can this engine support two things rather than just one? So the features what I'm mentioning to you about a car, all these features or characteristics, I can call that as a product scope, that this is the product I am looking at. Now, what's the project scope? The project scope is how do you deliver that car for which the features are getting explained. That is what is called as project scope. Now, project scope is always expressed in the 5 process groups like initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and control, and closing. So that's my process group. So when I say project scope is always into the IPECC. So the defined scope process talks about of both the product scope as well as the project scope. Now, once you have defined the scope, the next process what we have here, that process is called as create work breakdown structure. I'm writing a short form here called WBS. So create work breakdown structure. This deals with taking the scope in consideration, taking the requirements that you have gathered in the collect requirements as an input, and trying to create a hierarchy kind of a document. Like if you know an organization hierarchy document, the man at the top in my organization, his designation or name is mentioned at the top, followed by the other people, and starting from, let us say, the managing director or CEO, you try to come back till the executive level. This is how an organization breakdown structure is talked about. So a WBS, the full form is work breakdown structure. So from a presentability perspective, the structure looks like a hierarchy diagram, like an organization hierarchy. And what we do is the work to be done, the major work to be done is mentioned at the top, and then we try to break this work into smaller portions of the work. And that is where we'll make the further levels, maybe level 2, level 3, level 4. So this is how we'll try to get a deep dive into the work breakdown structure. So the process of creating the work breakdown structure, that is done in this particular fourth process of the scope, which is called as the create WBS. And what we also try to do with the help of WBS is we try to create a document which is called as the scope baseline. Scope baseline is basically a final scope which has been agreed after discussion with the team and other stakeholders. Now, the word baseline, I would like to address it here because I'll be using this word maybe a couple of other occasions as well. Now, what's a baseline? So baseline is that standard or the agreed plan which got approved after having a discussion with all the stakeholders. And very important message here with the baseline is, once baselines are approved, the changes to the baseline cannot be done under authority of a project manager. And that is where we have to seek a change request to the management. So CR, which is a short form of a change request, is a very common word most of us would know in our organization. So the change request starts coming in a picture when project manager is not having an authority to change the documents by himself. So once baselines are signed, approved, after that stage, any changes on those documents, that can only be done after putting a change request to the respective management committee. And once they approve, the changes will be made. But before the baselining of document, project manager has the authority to carry out the changes at his level. Okay. So create WBS is the fourth and the last process in the planning of scope management. And it gives me scope baseline. So remember, the processes which are giving me a baseline, they are a little more important for me. Okay. Now let us move forward. Let us talk about of a schedule management. So first process in schedule management.
One doubt here. So this define scope, create WBS, these are the subset of plan scope management, or these are the next process areas? All these are part of that 49.
All these are part of 49. The subsets I'm not discussing it now. The subsets what we have is only the inputs, tools, techniques, and output.
Okay, thank you.
What I'll do is, maybe for everybody's clarity, let me start writing down a process number like this. For example, 4.1. And here I'll write down 13.1. And why I'm writing 4 and 13, I'm sure you remember it. This is to keep ourselves in sync with the PMBOK Guide 6th edition. And on a plan scope management, let me say that this is my process 5.1. And let me now move forward. The collect requirement is my 5.2 process. Then comes up define scope 5.3. The number has no relevance in your exam. It is just that I wanted to make sure that both documents look like. Okay, and then let me start with the schedule management, which is 6.1. I think now it's very clear. Okay. Now, first process, which is plan schedule management. This process, as I said, focuses on how do I define activities? How do I sequence them? How do I try to look at on the timelines which are required? So basically an approximation or an estimation of the time for each of those activities. And then we talk about finalizing our schedule. So let me go step by step. So the next process what I have here, and that process is called as define activities. Now, how do I define activities? For me to define activities, the key document what I'll be utilizing here, that key document is going to be my work breakdown structure. The work to be done That's written on a broader level in the work breakdown structure. And if you try to correlate and maybe look at any of the hierarchy structures has a lot of boxes and a lot of layering done. But in that box, you do not have a big space to write down many things about that activity. It is just the name what you are trying to highlight. So the other detailings are supposed to be mentioned somewhere. So now what I'm talking about is, let us say that create WBS is actually giving me a one-line item in, let us say, layer number 4. And the work is, I have to shift from second floor to the ground floor. So that's a work which is mentioned in the work breakdown structure. Now, for me to shift in from the second floor to a ground floor, what are the activities I'm going to be needing? And that is what is the process name suggesting here, saying define activities. So when I define activities, I can say that I need to have, I need to gather the boxes, I need to gather the tape, I need to gather the maybe some kind of a fork or a lift to carry these stuff. I need somebody to help me in packing, unpacking. So all these are going to be the activities what you will be needing to complete the work which is mentioned in the work breakdown structure. And now all these activities I will be writing down in a process which is called as define activities. So my base item for starting up the define activities is going to be a WBS, which is work breakdown structure. So I'll consider that as my foundation item, and then I'll start finding out what activities I need. So what I have to create is, I have to just write down the name of those activities and a small definition of what do you mean by packing, what do you mean by unpacking, what do you mean by bringing fork. So all that you have to mention that one by one. And now once you have done that, there would be a need for you to look at in what sequence I need to do this activity. Once you know what are the activities required, the second thing what I'm writing, third item what I'm writing here, 6.3 as sequence activity. Now, is unpacking to be done first, or I need to first bring in the boxes? Should I need to pack the items in a proper foil and with packing material, or I should straight away start putting those items into the box? So there is a sequence, right? And let me also relate with one of the other examples we talked about of preparation of a tea. And I'm again correlating. We discussed about preparation of a tea. I said, if I have to prepare a ginger tea, when we checked with one of our chefs, the chef very clearly communicated, for you to get a very good flavor and maybe I would say the aroma of ginger, it is good to add ginger in the beginning once water starts boiling. So that's a sequence in which the chef is suggesting us. But when I ask the same question to a chef saying, hey, I'm not preparing a ginger tea, I'm preparing a cardamom tea. So when is that I should be putting a cardamom? The chef communicated to me, hey, if you are preparing a cardamom tea, once the tea is ready, that's the last thing you should be doing it. So why I'm actually talking about this example from a two perspectives, for every project, we need to take help of a subject matter expert to understand what is the right sequence of doing that activity so that I consume less time and my product, what I create, is going to be an awesome product and it serves the purpose what customer is expecting. So this is what is a sequence activity for me. And once you have done the sequence of activity, if you know the first water has to come to a boiling, then you have to add up ginger, then you have to again wait for some more time, then you have to add up tea leaves, etc. So once I know each of those items, then the jobs become very easy for me to correlate on all these perspectives. So this is how we look at maybe on the overall processes what we are talking about. Okay. Let me now move to the next item we have, which is on sequence activities.
Yeah, I have one small question here.
Yeah.
Yeah, like create a WBS, define activity, sequence. All these are actually a one document in which all activities are mentioned with the details, what we'll do first, what will go last. Am I right? It's a single document which can define all the topics in one go. Am I
These
right?
are different documents. Work breakdown structure is only a hierarchy or a diagram, whereas define activity is a list of all those activities and a definition. These two are different documents. The work breakdown structure is becoming an input for me to define the activities and sequencing them. Okay.
Understood.
So
Understood.
create WBS gives me a work breakdown structure. Define activities gives me activity list, activity attribute, and sequence activity places them in an order so that I know what should be done first, what should be done later, what can be done in parallel, what cannot be done in a parallel, with a purpose that I should be consuming the least amount of time and my job also should be completed pretty nicely. Okay. Now, the next process I have is estimate activity duration. So now that you have defined activities, you know what activities I need to accomplish. And you have also done a sequencing of those activities. So you are also aware now what is to be done first and what is to be done later. And then I'm just asking a very small item saying how much time each of those activities will take. So coming back on our tea preparation example, how long the water has to come to a boiling. When you add ginger, how long should I wait? So every activity you will assign maybe a timeline. Let us say that 2 minutes, 1 minute, 5 minutes. This is what I'm expecting you to do on the estimate activity duration. Against each of those activity, please start adding up the time required to finish that activity. This is how I prepare an approximation of each of those activities in terms of the time required. And that's the process name as well, called estimate activity resources. That means for each of those activity, I should start preparing an estimation. Okay, and with this activity, then we'll be ready to prepare our final schedule. And this is called as develop schedule. Now the estimate what you created in the estimate activity duration, that will be fed back in develop schedule. And then when I'm developing schedule, I will consider a lot of other perspectives. For example, if I know that this particular job in the past vendor was not able to deliver in the committed time, he took 10% extra time to deliver it. So should it be a good idea for me to add up some more time so that there is no risk at this moment? Then you would also notice that, hey, there are going to be uncertainties. If the resources crunch is there and I don't have enough resources, then there is a possibility I may not be able to finish this job in 10 minutes. It might take 11 minutes because resources are going to be a challenge. So what I do is when I develop my final schedule, I try to look at more perspectives to figure out on few other areas. Maybe I'll have to look at into certain, let us say, the certain commitments, certain reportings, certain procedural delays which might happen. So I need to even consider those perspectives when I create my final schedule. So the developed schedule gives me a document which is called as schedule baseline. So schedule baseline is the document which is kind of an approved document by management. And again, I have used the word called baseline, which means after the baseline is signed, the authority of changing in the document goes away from a project manager's hand. And from that time onwards, any change to be done in this document has to be done with a change request document to the management. So this takes care of the 5 processes in the planning of schedule management. Now my schedule is ready. The next process now what I have, that's called as plan cost management. In any of the planning processes, you are very well aware now that plan means I'm going to be talking about on various processes what I have to do that in the costing, and which talks about of the processes basically from the perspective of how do I estimate cost, how do I look at maybe few risks, How do I arrive at my final cost baseline? And how do I control my cost? So strategies, discussions involving all these items about cost, those are discussed in the plan cost management. And then I derive in a document which is called as cost management plan. I heard some question in between.
Yes, sir. Padma
Yeah,
here.
please.
I just wanted a question like this WBS elements and activities have the linking, right? So is it a couple of activities together achieving one of the WBS element, or it's one-to-one?
It's reverse actually. So what I'm suggesting you is you pick up one work to be done from a WBS, write down what activities are required. If the work what I have, let me give a little name to work. Let me say that the work what I have, that work number is 4.1. So under 4.1, how many activities I'm going to be needing? Activity number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So every work breakdown structure item, you have to write down separately on what activity is required for that item. Okay. I'm not clubbing all the activities. I'm actually trying to look at, for me to do a shift, for example, coming back on our shifting example, what are the activities required for me to shift from second floor to ground floor? So that's my one item in the work breakdown structure. There may be another item for me in the work breakdown structure saying I have to shift the managing director's room from a second floor to a 10th floor. So that could be my separate work item in the work breakdown structure. For that, the activities, it could be same or a different, but I will write down those activities separately for that work breakdown structure. Okay, clear now?
Oh, yes, sir. Then for every element in the WBS, we are going to create a set of activities to achieve that one element.
Oh yes, I think your understanding is absolutely perfect. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So moving on, after plan cost management, what we have is a process called as estimate cost. What you have noticed here is the scope, time, and cost. These are very, very important element for us in a project. And we are trying to put a very big emphasis in creating these documents, because any mistake in scope, time, cost now would actually lead to a blunder at a later stage. So it's better that we should be extremely careful in creating these documents. So the word says estimate cost. So estimate cost, the word estimate always gives me a message in my mind that it is not a final costing. It is just an approximation. So what we are going to be doing is with the work breakdown structure, with the activity list, with the activity sequencing, with the activity duration, all these items are going to be very good input for me. And using those activities, I am going to be creating the estimate for each of those items. If I know that I need 10 boxes, in an activity is written, I need 10 boxes to shift my seat from second floor to ground floor. Now I can find out how much cost is there for each of those boxes. Let's say that cost of one box is $1. So cost of 10 boxes is $10. So in estimate cost, I'll write down number of boxes required 10 per box cost $1. Total is $10 for me. So this is how I arrive at the cost of that particular activity. So what I need to do now is, with each of those activities what I have, I will be assigning a little monetary value, and this is how I'm going to be estimating the costing of each of those activities. Okay, now this costing what you have created, it is just an approximation. So I need another process wherein I will finalize this costing, and that will become my final costing for my project. So this process in which we finalize the costing, that's called as determine budget. Now determine budget process is taking the estimated cost, whatever you have estimated, that is becoming an input here in determine budget. And in determine budget, I also take care of a lot of other perspectives, risk, certain reserves. And let us say that in a customer's purchase order, he has mentioned something about penalty clause, service level agreement. And you know that you are dealing with vendors, and vendor has a past track record that he's only able to deliver 85% of his performance. 15% of time he's unable to complete that job in time. So if I have to take up the task to handle that 15%, should I add up some budget into it to deal with those issues? So all that I have to start mentioning it here, and then I will arrive into my final budget. So the process called determine budget, this gives me an output which is called as cost baseline. So cost baseline is going to be a final approved cost which is signed and approved by the management. And you know it very well, when a word baseline is added, this means now the changes cannot be done at the project manager's level. He has to request those changes to the senior management, and the team which is going to be approving those changes, a common name to this team is given, and that's called as CCB, Change Control Board. That's the team which is a common name given in many organizations. However, I have seen few organizations may have twisted the name it a little bit, but the purpose is a senior management in the team who is going to be responsible for saying yes or no to a change request. So with that understanding, we are through with the three processes which we have that in the cost here. Okay, with that we move to the quality. In quality, we have in planning one process which is called as plan quality management. The plan quality management talks about of understanding what quality policies my organization has. We'll try to take help from the stakeholders, the experts, to understand how is the quality being dealt in my project. How are we going to be executing the quality? How are we going to be monitoring and controlling the quality? How do I make sure that I have a process in place to check the documentation which is leading to development of the product? So all that is going to be getting discussed in the plan quality management. And output of a plan quality management, the first big output is called as quality management plan. Okay. Let us move to the resource management. In resource management, the first process what we have, that process is called as plan resource management. Now the process called plan resource management is also doing a similar job, wherein I need to understand how do I acquire resources, how do I estimate resources, how do I try to manage them, how do I develop a team, how do I control those resources. All that is going to be getting discussed in the plan resource management. Output of plan resource management is a resource management plan. We need to also understand what kind of job profiles we will have, what kind of staffing management plan I will have, what kind of structures I'm going to be giving it to the people. So all that is going to be part of my plan resource management. And the second process what we have in the resource management, and that too within the planning, that process is estimate activity resources. Now the word resources here, this word should be referred to manpower, machinery, material, infrastructure, equipment. So all kind of resources I will estimate, and it will be easy for you to do an estimation because your work breakdown structure is already ready. You have also done define activities, you have also done sequence activity. So with all that done already, you already have a list of activities and things available to you. Then it's very easy for us to do an estimation on the resources, right? Now with that estimation, if we look at on the planning, in resource we only have two processes in the planning. Then I'll move on to the communication management, and the first process I have it here, that is called as plan communications management. Now the word which is plan communication management, it also signifies very clearly that, hey, I will be planning on what are the communications required at different point in time in my project. To whom should I communicate? How should I communicate? How should I gather? How should I acquire that information? How should I distribute? How should I maybe keep a tracking of that information? All those strategies are going to be discussed here. And the output of this document is going to be called as Communications Management Plan. So how do I manage my communication? How do I monitor my communication? All that is going to be discussed, and those discussions will be kept, and we'll prepare a plan that is going to be called as Communication Management Plan. Then comes up the next knowledge area, which is risk management. In risk management, we have many processes. Let me start with the first one in the risk management, and that is plan risk management. Now, the process plan risk management focuses on how do I identify risks in my project? How do I estimate those risks? Estimate in the sense, the kind of quantification. How do I prioritize? How do I find out what response will fit in to respond to that risk? How do I look at implementing those responses, what I have prepared, and how do I kind of monitor those risks? So first process, which is plan risk management, gives me an output called as risk management plan. The second process, what I have here, the name is very easy, and the name is called as identify risks. This process, as the name indicates, focuses on how to identify the possible risks in my project. And by the way, if you wanted to understand the word risk, so remember two things. Risk is all about on probability and impact. So my question to everyone is, do you see a possibility of rain coming up today? Let me ask this question to the people who are in Bangalore. Last over 1 week's time, I see a trend that the rain is coming up every day. I think post lunch, I see the rains coming up. So what is the probability today that rains will happen? Any guesses?
50%.
50%. Now, the percentage what you are giving it to me, I will relate this percentage word as a word called as probability. So whenever you talk about of a risk, there are two words which come in a picture. One is probability and the other is impact. So when you said maybe the rain will come 50% chance, so that 50% chance is a probability. So risk is all about of uncertainty of an event to happen in future. That is what is a risk all about. So I need to understand and write down a list of all those risks which can happen in my project. Somebody can put up the paper in my team. There is a possibility person might go, and that could be a scarcity of manpower possible. Equipments what you have bought, they might fail. You might have an option of power not being there, possible. You might have maybe change of the scope in between, and customer wants few more items to be delivered, and now you do not have a budget to go forward. So all these what I'm talking about are the possible risks which can happen. And when I talk about a risk, I talked about for two words yesterday. First word is called as the known risk, and the second word what I talked about is the unknown risk. Known and unknown. Unknown means what you cannot predict now, and known risks, anyway, we know that the risks what which we can think of, which we can predict. Got it? So known and unknown, we have all those risks which are there. And then let me talk about of the third process what we have in the planning of risk, and that process talks about of perform.
Just a question here. How
Yeah.
you also said that we identify risks also in the plan risk management, right? How different are the previous 2 points?
Plan risk management focuses on how will you identify the risk. So whenever there is a word called plan and there is something in between and ending up with management, please remember a word called how. I'm not doing that job, but I'm asking, how will I do that thing? So the most important word with the first process in the planning is to remember a word called how. How means what strategy? Okay. So you're not identifying the risk. And this how word is applicable to all other processes in that knowledge area. So let me give you the definition one more time. For example, if the word was plan schedule management, now I'll tell you how to create a definition of plan schedule management. So I'll use words like, hey, how do you define activities? How do you estimate activities? How do you estimate activity duration? How do you develop schedule? How do you control schedule? All that is getting discussed in the plan schedule management, and that is what is called as schedule management plan. You got it now?
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
See, what I'm doing is I'm very clearly giving you a definition saying, how do I do my remaining processes? That strategy is getting documented, and that's part of the plan something management. Now, similarly, if I use a word called plan risk management, it will talk about how do you handle the other processes and the risk, discuss with your team. And the reason why I'm actually repeatedly mentioning that you discuss and prepare a strategy is to get along with your key stakeholders now itself. These guys should not feel like that the plans have been prepared in isolation. The challenge happens in the project when few people feel like that the plans are loaded onto them. And they have a lot of concerns and they have a lot of inputs, and they feel like, no, this plan is not adequate. Maybe they would have done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what am I trying from the beginning is the key stakeholders whom I have already identified before I started my planning. I want those stakeholders to be part of this exercise, part of this process, so that I try to have a buy-in from them and their inputs, considering majority of them would be experts in their own functions. So I wanted to, one side, give them a respect, and the second side, I wanted to learn from their experience so that my planning goes on a track. So that's the purpose of the perform quantitative risk analysis. Okay, moving forward, the word which is called as quantitative, this is a little important word I must highlight. The way we are following up a sequence, the first process what I do here is, that's called as qualitative. And the next process what I do it here, that word is called as quantitative. So what's the difference between these two? Let me take up that difference one by one. So second is quantitative. So the word qualitative refers to prioritization. Out of all the risks what you have, which risk is of high priority and which risk is of low priority? In simple words, there may be some risks which are high on probability, which are high on impact. Broaderly, I may say that a risk which is having very high probability to happen and impact is going to be huge, most likely that's going to be my high priority risk. A risk which is going to be having less probability and very less impact, that risk could be of a low priority to me. Okay, so I'll give you a small example. Let us say that I have a motorcycle, a moped, and all of us know that a motorcycle is by default not having any extra tire. So if you are looking for a risk that you might meet a flat tire or a puncture situation at some point in time, how much is the probability that you will have a flat tire? Now that you know that tubeless tire is a trend, with tubeless tire, is there a very high probability that a flat tire will happen every day? The answer is no. Maybe once in 6 months, once in a year, if a flat tire happens, I don't consider that as a very big risk for me. I can manage to call up a service provider who can actually come to an on-site and help me in doing that repairs. Or if I know that there is a shop close by and the guy can actually help me to come out from a flat tire problem, I can actually drag my vehicle till that place and get the job done. So there are many possibilities. So is this risk of flat tire, is that going to be a very big risk for me, or that's going to be a very small risk for me? So as a team, we will try to decide which risk is having high priority, which risk is having low priority. If you feel like flat tire is going to be a very, very big risk, maybe then you should rethink, should you really buy a motorcycle, or you should buy maybe some other vehicle which has an option of an extra tire. You got it? So that's the qualitative risk analysis, which is high priority. I would like to assign high priority to them. So the process called perform qualitative risk analysis focuses on prioritizing all the risk what I have, and the process identify risk would have created all the possible risks what the team has discussed. And from that, I will try to prioritize. Now comes up the process number 4 here, which is 11.4, which talks about of perform quantitative risk analysis. Quantitative means quantifying. It's like giving a monetary value, how much the impact will come. So if a flat tire happens, what is going to be impact? Let us say that impact is going to be $2, $3, and maybe a little loss of time. Maybe if the puncture shop is about 500 meters from the place where you have faced this problem. So you will take 5-10 minutes of time to reach there. The vendor will take, let us say, half an hour time to do the repairing. So one is the cost of repairs. The other is the time what you have lost. So if I try to add that up, this is how I can quantify on that particular risk. Let me give you another example. Let us say that in your office, the electricity has gone, and now somebody has put onto the generator. So generator runs on a fuel. You know how much is the cost of a generator per hour, how much is the consumption happening for fuel. So we can easily calculate that if electricity goes off, how much is my cost for handling that particular risk. That's the quantification. So this we call that as a perform quantitative risk analysis. So the good part here is we have first prioritized and then we have quantified. In some organizations, what they do is they try to carry out both these processes in one go, which is qualitative and quantitative. So I leave that to your organization. And if you are able to do maybe such two processes in one attempt itself, I'm going to be calling that as a process tailoring. So you customize if you feel like these two processes can be done together. Okay, let me move next to the process called plan risk response. So the process plan risk response focuses on how do I handle the risk when it has happened? What action should I take? The immediate example what I quoted, if power goes off, I have a generator. If generator also is not working, I will have maybe an inverter. Otherwise, I'm working on a laptop. I know my laptop can survive for next 2 hours pretty easily if it is a power pertaining to some of my equipments. But if the room in which you are sitting in, if that room, if you are staying in without an air conditioner for more than half an hour, maybe it will be difficult for you to sit in that room. So we need to find out what alternate. So those are going to be called as a responses you will be considering for the particular risk. So all those responses, we will discuss that in a process called plan risk response. In general, there are 10 such strategies which are mentioned in the PMBOK guide 6th edition for dealing with the risk. So we'll discuss those strategies as we move into the risk management knowledge area later. My next discussion point with you is going to be on procurement management, and the process what I have in procurement. The first process is called as plan procurement management. So the process which is plan procurement management, this process discusses on how do I conduct my procurement, what item I have to procure, what SOW, what contents, who are the prevailing vendors, who should be the right vendors to put the document to, what is the process of conducting a procurement, on what parameters should I evaluate the vendors, how do I control my procurement, what performance are we expecting from them, what is going to be a prevailing costing, are we looking at procuring raw material, or are we looking at procuring finished goods? Do you want it to do that job by yourself, or do you want it to outsource this job to somebody? So we'll also be discussing a lot of other things, including make or buy analysis. You wanted to prepare on your own, or you wanted to prepare by a third party. Now let us discuss about a car manufacturer. A car manufacturer, when they are planning about their car manufacturing, they don't manufacture the screws, nuts, bolts, tires, and everything on their own. So there is a chance that they try to design the car, and few components they try to outsource to a third party. So all that is going to be part of procurement. What to outsource, what to prepare ourselves, all those discussions, all those strategies, they are done in a plan procure management. And output of my plan procurement management, I would say the biggest output is going to be a procurement management plan and few other documents. So that's the plan procurement management process all about. And then we are on a last process in the planning of the overall project here, and that's called as plan, stakeholders, engagement. So that's the process what we have, which focuses on how do I engage my stakeholders, what strategies will work, what strategies will not work. All that is getting discussed here, and that is going to be called as the plan stakeholder engagement. Output of plan stakeholder engagement is called as stakeholders engagement plan. Okay, so that was maybe a perspective to give you a fair idea about all the processes in the planning. And now let me try to summarize few things with you. In initiating, I discussed with you about two processes. In planning, so far, I have covered up 23 processes with you. And once you are through with all the 23 processes, then I'm going to be doing another process, which is called as project integrity. Let me write down here. This is called as develop project management plan. So the develop project management plan basically is nothing but a combination of each of those plans what we have discussed from the knowledge area number 5 till knowledge area number 10. So if I have to maybe highlight each of that with color, so this color what I'm currently highlighting with, all those plans, once they are ready, then only I'll say that, hey, I'm ready with my project management plan. So in simply speaking, a project management plan is nothing but a combination of all those subsidiary plans and documents put together. So that's going to be my develop project management plan. So what I did so far with you is I gave you an explanation about 24 processes of the planning. So what was the target? 49. How much we did? 2 on initiating, 24 on planning. Let us talk about on execution. In execution, what you have, let me start with a process on the quality. And I'll come on this stage. This is 8.2. And the process I have here is called as manage quality. This process is part of execution. If I look at from the top, it is part of execution. If I look at from the side, it is part of the quality management knowledge area. The managed quality process focuses on quality assurance. It talks about of your documentation, your audit, the way you have captured the details and actions. And the purpose is to find out the documentation what I have created, is that good enough for me to create the good quality of products, or are there any gaps? So this process is mainly focusing on a quality assurance. A common word which people know about this process is called QA. QA is a quality assurance. So quality assurance is a one activity out of the managed quality. And we should not be restricting ourselves just to find out the problems, but we should also look at on addressing them and finding out what could be a solutions for those problems. So that process is called as managed quality. Then I move to a next process, which is part of my resource management knowledge area. And the process name is acquire resources. Acquire resources, as the name indicates, deals with acquiring man, material, machine, infrastructure, equipment. Whether you would like to rent those items, whether you would like to purchase those items, whether you wanted to take them on lease, that's a decision you would have discussed in the plan procurement management or in the plan resource management as well. So acquire resource focuses on getting those resources for the project. And in the overall resources, we do have the human resource as well. And human resource needs a development. Nobody is ready from a day one to deliver for your project. There needs to be an induction and a training which is required for people to deliver their job better. So that's something which is done in the development team. And after development team, we have a process called manage team. So once the team is working on, I have to look at, is the team delivering as per the expectations? Are there any gaps? Are there any improvements? Do I need to retrain some of my team members? All that is part of my manage team process. You may also consider manage team as a kind of an appraisal of their work happening. So this is what we have to understand on the execution portion of the resources. So in total, we have 3 processes here. And then I move to the next process, which is on manage communication. The process managed communication is again part of executing. And this is also linked with the communication knowledge area. And the main job what I do that in managed communication is that I keep delivering those communications what have been planned. Whatever has been planned, I deliver those communication to the stakeholders. That's the main job I do that in managed communication. If I come down in the risk, and that's our next process, which is 11.6, and this process is called as implement risk response. So if you have agreed that if power goes off, I'll put on a generator. So that's the implementation of a risk response. Okay, now I move to the next process here, which is going to be 12.2. And this process is called as conduct procurement. So the process called conduct procurement, this focuses on selecting a vendor who would be the right fit, best fit in my delivery of the respective product in my organization. And this process also involves in signing up a formal contract with that person. So 2 main activities in conduct procurement: selection of vendor, signing up of those documentation, and needless to say, you may maybe consider issuing a purchase order or giving him an LOI or a memorandum of understanding so that he starts delivering those items. And then I have a process in the stakeholders, and this process is called as manage stakeholder engagement. So you had done a planning about stakeholder there in the plan stakeholder engagement. In manage stakeholder engagement, you are checking up if the strategy is working, not working. So here, let me say this was 13.2 and this is 13.3. Okay. So manage stakeholder engagement, and then let us talk about of the 2 processes what we have here. The first is called as the direct and manage work. And the second what we have here, that's called as manage project knowledge. So the direct and manage project work, the process what we have in the top, this process basically is nothing but a summary of all the other processes what we have in the remaining knowledge areas in execution. And there is a reason why I'm actually saying that. The word called integration means consolidation, summary, right? We agreed that. So you would have understood so far that integration is all about consolidation of all other processes. And in a nutshell, I consider the integration as a control tower of my project. Whatever is happening in my project, everything is getting summed up in the integration. So my project is beginning from the process in initiating, which is called as develop project charter. My planning also is again getting summarized at process 4.2, which is called as develop project management plan. Similarly, my execution also is happening in all other processes, which is also getting summed up in this process. And this process, which is called as 4.3 here in our nomenclature, and this is direct and manage project work. Now, a process called 4.4 manage project knowledge. This got introduced from PMBOK Guide 6th edition, and the purpose of this direct and manage project, the purpose of this manage project knowledge was to ensure that whatever lesson learned we have in the project, as and when there is an opportunity for me to learn, I must learn from it, and I must communicate to all the stakeholders, all the team members in the team, saying, hey, I faced this problem, and this is the solution to come out from these issues. So if you happen to face this problem again, please learn from the solution rather than you reinventing the solution and wasting time. So that was the main purpose of the managed project knowledge. In the previous version of a PMBOK, the managed project knowledge was not there. And what used to happen is when project used to come towards a closure, people used to spend a dedicated time to write down the lesson learned. And that was becoming too late. I would consider that as a charity, that while you're closing a project, you're trying to do a formality of documenting lesson learned. When you yourself are not utilizing the lesson learned, do you think somebody else is going to be utilizing your lesson learned when the project is going to be coming to an end? So with that as a thought process, PMI realized, and a lot of volunteers like me, we requested PMI saying there should be a process which should talk about of frequently utilizing the lesson learned in the project. And this is where this process was created, called as managed project knowledge. So if you try to count the number of processes in execution, 2 in the execution here at the integration, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Is if I look at here, correct me if I'm wrong, these are 10 processes for us here. Okay, and then let us talk about of monitoring and control. And remember, the process scope, time and cost has nothing in execution. Either you can plan or you can monitor or control. There is nothing what you can actually do it here. Now coming on a monitoring and control, the key activity you carry out in a monitoring and control process is to compare on what was planned. And when you are executing, find out where is the gap. Is it in line? Is it more? Is it less? That is the main activity done in the monitoring and control, to find out, track, monitor, and once you know that there are gaps, take appropriate actions to actually come out and resolve those issues so that you are back on your track and you are meeting those plans. So what I'll do is, let me start with the processes from the back here. I'll go in a reverse order. I'll start with the stakeholder engagement here. So what I'm asking you to do is, please check and monitor the engagement what you have with the stakeholders. So I'll say monitor stakeholder engagement. I repeat, in every monitoring and control process, you'll be doing a comparison with what got planned and where do we stand now based on execution. And if I need to assign a number for this, I will assign a number called 13.4 for this process. Coming on to the procurement, we need to control on what's getting procured. Is it in line? Is it not in line? So I'll call this process as control procurement. Let me come to the risk. In the risk, this is the 7th process in the sequence. And this is monitor risks. So based on what you planned, what you identified, monitor, there may be a need for you to do a reassessment. The risk which was of a high severity in the beginning may not be of a high severity now. In the beginning, everything was going as per timeline. But in the last 3 months, you realized you are running out of time. So time is becoming a bigger risk now. So keep monitoring your risks and take an action so that you don't land up into trouble. Moving on to the communication management. you cannot control communication. You can only monitor communication. If the words have been given, you cannot control, you can only monitor. So monitor communication, is that somebody was looking at? Is there any other gap? Are the people coming back to and saying, hey, I'm not getting my reports? This is not the data what I wanted? So find out all those things. And coming on resource, now when I'm actually moving on a resource, I cannot be controlling the manpower. That will be a wrong word to use. So rather, we have already used a word called managed team. So managed team itself is to take care of the manpower. So if I look at the 9.4 and 9.5 here, the developed team and managed team, they are very clearly focusing on human resources. Now, when I come to controlling, I am very particular. I will control the resources here, which is excluding the human resource. So the control word is meant for material, machine, infrastructure, equipment. It's not meant for manpower. When it comes to quality, of course, I have to control quality. Okay. And when it comes to costing, of course, cost needs to be controlled. And this is going to be maybe in our sequence 7.4. When it comes to schedule, of course, we need to control schedule. When it comes to scope, of course, I need to do two things in the scope. I need to validate the scope. And by the way, the validate of scope is to be done by the customer. So when you are ready with your product, you will go back to a customer and say, hey, Mr. Customer, can you check whether the item what I'm delivering it to you now, is that what is meeting your expectation, yes or not? So validation of the scope, customer is the one who's going to be saying yes and no. And then I have one more process here, which is called as control scope. Control scope is to ensure that we don't deviate from the agreed scope. That's the reason of mentioning control scope here. And then I come back on my integration. And integration, I have two processes here. First process, which is called as monitor and control project work. That's the main thing what I carry out in this process. And monitoring and control project work is nothing but a summary of all these processes what we have discussed in the monitoring and control. So let me assign a different color for each one of these. So all these processes what I'm highlighting now, all these processes are summing up at the top, and that is what is coming up in the monitoring and control project work. Apart from this, I also have one more process here, which is called as perform integrated change control. Now, this process, which is perform integrated change control, this process focuses on approving the change request. You remember I said baselining, and I said in baseline, whatever got finalized, and let us assume 6 months into the project, there is a change required in terms of the costing. You realize that the budget what you have prepared, that's falling too short. And you have to request to the management on maybe increasing your budget. And you know that now the increase of the budget is not in your hands. So all those CR or a change request, they are getting fed into this process. So this process is the only process out of the overall 49 wherein change request is sent for approval to the management. And I told you that the common word used for the approval committee for change request, that's called as CCB, Change Control Board. So this takes care of my processes in the monitoring and control. And if you look at the number of processes here, 2 here, 2 and 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have monitoring and control, we have about 12 processes here. And when it comes to closing, closing is we only have one process, which is close project. and phase. Close project and phase primarily focuses on putting efforts on delivering the final deliverables, releasing the resources, checking with the customers, signing up the agreement, taking a sign off with the stakeholder. So that's something what is to be done in the close project and close phase. And if at all there are any other formalities during the sign off, that's to be done towards the end. So if you look at in a nutshell, integration is my control tower of the overall project. So I'm trying to mention everything in integration in a red color, saying integration is my control tower of the overall project. The project begins with integration, which is a process called develop project charter. Project ends with integration, and the process is called close project and close phase. So sometimes I actually joke with my participants in saying the integration management process is like a human resource department of an organization, that your entry and exit in an organization is always being managed through the HR team. When you come in, they are the one to introduce you in the company. And when you make an exit, you have to again do the formalities as dictated by them. And in between, your performance, your many other perspectives are actually being controlled or managed by the HR. So that's something maybe sometimes I joke. I don't know whether that will make you to remember or correlate with the things or not. So this was my way of explaining this to you of all the overall processes what we have in the project management, about 49 processes.